said today that raised a lot of concern.
San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, they're very unsafe places, and we're going to straighten them out one by one. And this is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room. That's a war, too. It's a war from within. I told Pete we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for.
Something historic and deeply unusual happened today. A U.S. president addressed military leaders in a way that experts say crosses a long-standing line in American democracy. This speech wasn't about national security or foreign threats. It was about using the U.S. military inside American cities, a plan that many veterans and legal experts say is dangerous, unprecedented, and could reshape the relationship between the government and its own citizens. In this video, we're breaking down exactly what the president said, why it matters, and what it means for the future of our democracy. You need to hear this because it's not just about politics. It's about how the most powerful military in the world could be used against Americans at home. Earlier today, the president gathered hundreds of high-ranking generals and admirals from around the world at a cost of millions of dollars. This wasn't a routine meeting about security threats abroad. This wasn't about training or readiness. According to observers, the speech was overtly political and unlike anything seen in modern American history. The president used his time at the podium to say that the U.S. military must attack the enemy within, a phrase that stunned many in the room. He argued that American cities, particularly those led by his political opponents, should be treated as training grounds for the National Guard and the military. This was more than rhetoric about crime. It was a clear suggestion that American troops could be deployed against Americans, something past presidents have avoided, except in the most extreme emergencies. To understand why this is such a big deal, you need to know the context. Traditionally, U.S. presidents speak to military leaders about patriotism, readiness, or global policy goals. They do not use these moments to make partisan attacks or to frame fellow Americans as enemies. They found us There's a reason for that. The military is supposed to remain nonpartisan, loyal to the Constitution, not to any single leader or party. Yet in this speech, the president blurred those lines. He described cities like Chicago, San Francisco, New York, and Los Angeles as dangerous war zones and said the military should straighten them out one by one. He framed political opponents as a domestic enemy and claimed the country was under invasion from within, language usually reserved for foreign threats. Military leaders in the room followed protocol. They stood respectfully but stayed silent. Under military rules, they are not allowed to cheer or react to political remarks. That silence was telling. People who were there said it was one of the quietest rooms the president had ever walked into. At one point, he even commented on the silence and jokingly told the officers that if they didn't like what he was saying, they could leave the room, but warned that doing so would cost them their rank and their future. This combination of remarks threatening political consequences, framing American cities as war zones, and calling citizens the enemy within is something experts say we haven't seen before. Paul Rieckhoff, a veterans advocate who has long studied civil-military relations, said there is no precedent for this. Even after 9/11, the U.S. did not gather all of its senior military leaders for a speech like this. In his view, this was a low point for both the military and democracy. Let's be clear, a president has every right to talk about crime. They can discuss law enforcement strategies, propose policies, or call for cooperation between federal and local officials. But using the U.S. military to police American cities and framing it as a war is far outside the norm. That's why the Washington Post described this as the first time a president has publicly directed military leaders to be a major part of fighting a war from within U.S. cities. This isn't happening in a vacuum. Over the past few years, we've already seen federal agents and troops sent into places like Portland and Los Angeles, sometimes under controversial circumstances and sometimes blocked or limited by the courts. The president has also signaled an interest in testing or expanding his emergency powers that could be used to influence elections or consolidate authority. Critics warn that what we saw today is a preview of how those powers might be used. The president's own words are important. He said America is under invasion from within, that this is no different from facing a foreign enemy, and that it's more difficult because the supposed enemy doesn't wear uniforms. He signed an executive order creating a quick reaction force to handle what he called civil disturbances, and said the military has to handle it before it gets out of control. But as analysts point out, this is false on its face. You cannot be invaded from within your own country by your own citizens. In law and foreign policy, an invasion means a threat from outside, from another nation or a non-state actor. Calling fellow Americans an enemy is rhetoric, not reality. That's why the silence of the military leaders in the room matters so much. They didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They followed protocol, which forbids uniformed service members from reacting to political remarks. In doing so, they may have sent their own quiet message that this speech crossed a line. What's more, this wasn't just a one-off event. People close to the president and former aides have said this is part of a broader plan to test or even abuse national emergency powers in the future. They warn that he could try to distort elections or reverse outcomes using these powers. A fear rooted in the fact that he refused to leave peacefully after losing a previous election. Recough us. And other experts believe this is the most important story in America right now. In their view, the guardrails that protect the military from political manipulation are being stripped away. The president has the power to order strikes abroad, send ships to foreign waters, or deploy troops at home. And if those powers are used for partisan purposes, the consequences for democracy could be severe. Even in the moment, the president seemed aware of how unusual this was. He noted the silence, joked about it, and invited applause, which the rules do not allow. Fact checkers quickly pointed out that under military regulations, applause for political remarks isn't a matter of personal choice. It's prohibited to protect the military's nonpartisan role. In the end, the audience for this speech may not have been the generals in the room at all. It may have been the American public watching on TV or online, a photo opportunity designed to project strength and dominance, not to announce a new defense policy. But the content of the speech, the language used, and the threats implied tell a different story, one of growing politicization of the military. That's why so many veterans and analysts are sounding the alarm. They're not saying the military has turned political on its own. They're saying the commander-in-chief is trying to make it political, and that the silence of the generals may be the last remaining sign of resistance. This isn't about agreeing or disagreeing with a president's policies. It's about preserving a tradition that has kept the military separate from domestic politics for generations. Breaking that tradition risks turning the armed forces into a tool for partisan power rather than a protector of the Constitution. We've been warned. The president has said openly what he wants to do. It's on all of us, as citizens, as voters, and as people who care about demos. Crazy to understand what's happening, to stay informed, and to hold leaders accountable. Because once the military becomes a weapon in domestic politics, it's very hard to undo.